So, this is my Macross 2 review, and I'm going to be straight up. This is going to be very different than what all the other videos about Macross 2 are going to be. I debated on how I was going to do this, and I decided that I'd rather talk from the heart about this series than, like I did with Macross 7, where I made a huge list of things, like certain episodes that are good to watch and stuff like that. Because this is only 6 episodes, so I don't need to go through all that. But I wanted to counter all of the other people who hate on this series because they don't understand it. They look at it from not from the lens of Macross, we'll put it that way. I wanted to do I did want to kind of do a list of things with this video, but I guess I'll just, go through what I remember, because I just finished rewatching it for the billionth time, and I always, before I do these reviews, I will always rewatch the entire thing. Like, I did it with 7, I did it with Frontier, I did it with Frontier Movies, I did a Delta TV series, and then I wanted to give my thoughts on it. And because I want to have everything fresh in my mind when I talk about it. Now, first of all, I consider Macross 2 to be the greatest Macross that there is. And I tend to jump a bit between Do You Remember Love and Macross 2 is my favorite. Although I tend to focus more on Macross 2 when it comes to my favorite Macross, but in terms of quality, I think they're both equal. I mentioned before that I think that in my non-spoiler, teaser video for the second Delta movie, that I consider that the third best thing in Macross. But let's get some things out of the way from things about people who hate on this series. Things that they, that they state which are not very factual whatsoever, and to have more background of the situation in which this series was made. And because this is vitally important to understanding why Macross 2 is so good. Okay? The biggest thing is that what people tend to forget is there was no Macross, basically, after Do You Remember Love. Okay? There wasn't Macross. They released Flashback 2012 just as kind of a, it was scenes that they wanted to put into the end of Do You Remember Love, but they couldn't because of time constraints with the movie theaters. So most of the stuff that happens in Flashback 2012 is stuff that they had already animated for the most part. And although the stuff, like the newer stuff with the way Mikimoto had to draw, like, the 2012 meme, the 2012 high essay, and the 2012, Ichijo. Those new scenes were newly done specifically for it, but beyond that, it was basically just a massive music video for Mimate that she's going back and remembering what, like, her final concert on Earth before she hopped on Mega Road 1. Which a lot of people say, well, there's no proof that she's on Mega Road 1. Oh, yeah, there is. So, we'll put that aside for now. But outside of that, which was a direct-to-Laserdisc, I believe, or direct-to-video, it was a direct-to-home release with Flashback. So, of course, OVAs are the same way, but it was a little different. So we didn't really have Macross for 8 years. you could say. And they needed something to reintroduce people to the IP and to celebrate the 10th anniversary at the same time. Because as popular as Do You Remember Love was, you think after 5 or 6 years, you had a lot of Gundam going on. You know, you had Char's Counterattack, and the year before Macross 2, you had F91, which is extremely popular, and it's the reason why Moriguchi Hiroko has a solo career, basically. Because the song that she sang, was it Eternal Wind, was one of the most popular songs at the time, which gave her, you know, an entire career. And this is, and then the fact that Ijima Mari was not as popular as before, and plus she was getting really disillusioned with the Japanese, you know, music industry, and she ended up not too long after that, not too long after Macross 2, I believe she had already married the producer from Toto and had already moved to the United States, if I recall correctly. And she already left because she was just tired of the industry over here. So there was no real promotion of Macross whatsoever, plus the fact that Kawamori and Itano were like, okay, we're done, we're not doing Macross anymore. They needed something to get people back into this. Now, why am I saying this? Because one of the things that people that I've seen in videos that they use to bash Macross 2 is directly related to everything I just said. And that is, well, there was one particular video of somebody who said that they didn't do anything new. Well, they did do a lot new with Macross 2. They did a lot. But one of the things that people use is that there's a lot of direct references to Do You Remember Love in it. Like, you know, the scene with Ishtar singing on that particular, like, stage where Mime sang in Do You Remember Love, and there's, you know, lots of little things there that kind of really, that are very, very openly paying homage to Do You Remember Love in there. And this is something that they complained with. They say that wasn't original. Well, they needed to get the people who remembered Do You Remember Love to be interested in Macross again, because it had been such a long time since they had actually had any Macross. And so they use these scenes, and this is coming from somebody who is a massive fan of Do You Remember Love. I love Do You Remember Love, and I understand I can see where exactly where these people are saying they're supposedly copying the original Macross. It's not really copying, though, because it's all Macross and it's all canon. So, but I'm not going to really get into the canonicity of Macross 2, because I've already gone into why Macross 2 is canon in multiple videos already. But this is one of the arguments that people say about how it didn't really advance anything in Macross. Well, it really did. The way that, and I'm going to go into this a little bit later as well, with how it connects to the other series, because it's important to understand how Macross 2, even when it was released, because it was 1992 and there was no other Macross, and now all the other Macross series that have come out are kind of filling in the gaps to what was 80 years after the original Macross, the setting of the original Macross. So you have, you know, your Plus, you have your 7, you have your Frontier, and you have your Delta, right? And that's all leading up to Macross 2. Now, I wanted to get that out of the way because people need to understand the situation in which the series was made. Because if you don't understand the situation in which the series was made, it makes you have a more negative opinion of the series, like almost every video in the English review world of Macross that has been consistently bashing the series, and I will not. I will say that there are points in here, and there are some points in Macross too that I wish there was more to it, and I'll get into that later. But and so the like with every Macross, there's legitimate praises and legitimate criticisms you can make of every series. And what I try to do is I try to understand the legitimate criticisms, but I need to also destroy the completely bogus criticisms as well. And with Macross 2, this is vitally important because Macross 2 is a series that gets completely bashed by everybody in the English-speaking world. Now, there was one particular person I've had an argument with about Macross 2 recently, how he watched the English dub of it, which is already it's terrible for one, and for two, the translation does not give you the truth about the canon within Macross 2. We're not even talking about the canon of you know, how it connects to everything else. We're talking about within the canon of Macross 2. It does not explain it properly. And so he has no idea what the hell he's talking about because, you know, I even read the novels, which is something that Tomita wanted to, like, basically expand on what he did with the show. But, there's more, because of the fact that the English dub was so horribly done and it didn't translate the important points really well at all, because I can tell, because, you know, he didn't understand anything of what I was saying when it came to the lore of Macross 2. It's, you know, you can't bash something without all the facts, and he didn't have all the facts, so I'm gonna have to go over that point as well. But this was a criticism he had about, you know, the Autosonova, which is, like, he said something to the effect of, like, the Autosonova was, you know, what was it? It was the, like, how the Macross is the Autosonova or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was. But the Autosonova is not the Macross. That's Autosnohune, which is the Autos' ship, right? This is very explicitly stated multiple times in the series. Within those 6 episodes. Multiple times, because Ishtar is constantly saying it. Now, the Autosnova is the area where the emulators are basically, like, it's a holy area that is shown in the episode Marduk Disorder. And it's a specific area within the flagship of the fleet down the front line, which is outside of Mars. And this area is for the Marduk who've been contaminated by culture. And so the what is it? It's there to bring back the pure Marduk, you know, way of thinking, to get rid of the contamination. So that was already something that I've had an argument with somebody about, and this goes to the fact that, like, I'm watching it in Japanese. I understand everything in Japanese, and so I own, you know, multiple. I've said this in multiple videos. I do own a lot of the source material. I have the This Is Animation Macross 2 book. I have the limited edition Blu-rays that has a special booklet, which I'm going to go into after I've gone through everything, because it has that, along with the special single that came with the Laserdisc set, actually adds more to the lore of Macross 2, which I did a video on the lore of the Marduk, which is connected to this. And the just the overall misunderstanding of the series, and the the place it holds really bothers me. So now let me get into it. This is my absolute favorite Macross series. As a non-movie, it's my favorite. And it's all because while some people may say it doesn't do anything new, which is bullshit, and I'll get into that in a minute. It hits all the points of what a Macross series should be. Okay, it hits everything. It hits every single point exactly where it should be. You got your love triangle, which is done extremely, which I think is done very well, given the situation that the series is in. It has Valkyries, and it has songs, and the major thing is that they make it so the lead character Hibiki is not a pilot. He has a Valkyrie pilot's license, but he's not specifically a pilot. Okay, he's a reporter. This is very different. This has only been done for Macross 2 and for nowhere else. It will probably never be done again. Macross 2 is very unique in that sense. The main ace pilot is female, which is, like, if you consider, like, you think of Max and Miria, like, because they're the greatest ace pilots in Macross ever, period. But the issue with them is they're not actually main characters in anything outside of Macross M3. They're like the lead characters in Macross M3. But other than that, they've always been side characters. Now, for a leading character to be the ace pilot who's female, which is, and this is not to be, like this whole, leftist stuff. That's not the point. Because that's not what recent Macross, you could say, is kind of pandering a bit, but Macross 2 was never pandering at all. And it's just they wanted to do something different, because in Do You Remember Love, it was Ichijo, and they wanted to do something different. So that's one thing. The Macross is also the only series of Macross to ever have a member of the love triangle be an enemy. Okay? This is really, really important, because this is something that's not been done since Macross 2. Macross 2 has a very unique position in this. The love triangle, of course, is the typical man with two females, but one of the females is the ace pilot, and the other female is an enemy singer. So this is very, very unique in the love triangle situation of Macross, okay? Then let's see. You have it's very directly talking about Macross City, because everybody's living in Macross City. Now, the thing is, the last time we see Macross City, if you don't count the second Delta movie, because there is a scene with Macross City in it, the last time we really see Macross City in any form is during Macross Plus. But Macross Plus is released after Macross 2. So, but in the timeline, the last time we really see Macross City is in Plus, like in any like detail, right? Because it does make a cameo appearance in the Frontier TV series, if I recall correctly, when the Bajara show up. But it's not like look at the city. While people want to talk about, the songs and stuff like that, well, this is where I'm going to get into a little bit more of the connections between the series. Now, I want to do this in chronological order in which we talk about the connections to the previous series in the timeline, okay? Because it's just easier that way, so people can actually see. So, from Do You Remember Love? Now, this is important because every other series is based off of this point, is that the Macross that is sitting inside Macross City is the armed type Macross, not the Prometheus type. Okay, the Prometheus type is the TV series Macross. Okay, this is the one that has a dataless attack and all this other stuff, and that's because Armed 1 and Armed 2 in the TV series were destroyed by the Zentradi in space. So what the Macross did is they took the Prometheus and the dataless and stuck them on the arms instead as a replacement. Macross 2 is based on the movie. It is the arm type, and this is this is blatantly shown in the final episode sing-along on the arms. You can see it has 01 and 02. It's Armed 1 and Armed 2. This is the Do You Remember Love Macross. Okay, and this is also the Macross in Macross Plus. It's also the Macross that you see for one scene in Macross Frontier. It's also the one you see in the second Delta movie for 1 second. All of them are the armed type, meaning they are directly connected to Do You Remember Love. So, let's get that out of the way. Outside of that, the one thing I noticed, this is something I didn't notice before, out of all the times I've watched Macross 2, is that when in the final episode sing-along, when Ishtar looks inside and sees the city, that was where all the people lived inside there, it has 3 black screens that are up kind of high. This is a direct reference to Do You Remember Love, when Ichijo and Hayase return to the Macross. I see Mime, the video of Mime singing, what is it? I think it's Red Moon, Silver Moon, or something like that. That is a direct reference to that as well. So, it's all connecting directly to Do You Remember Love, okay? But outside of that, there's no real direct connections to Do You Remember Love because it's 80 years previous. So, and people's awareness of what happened with the war with the Zentradi and the Meltrandi is disappearing. Okay, and so even Hibiki makes a reference to it. That that's sure, that ship came down 80 years ago, but it's nothing special or something like that, right? So even people that are like, okay, whatever, it's just some big giant ship that's sitting there, is basically how they feel about it. Until they see it fly in episode 6, and then they're like, oh my god. But that's the connections there. The connection to Macross Plus, really nothing outside of maybe you could argue the YF-21, because the YF-21 was designed with a lot of Zentradi ideas put into it, and there is a Zentradi designed Valkyrie in Macross 2, which also goes along with the VF-14 Vampire, which was a also, I believe, what was it, the Cutlass, the VF-9 Cutlass, I think it was also very much designed by Zentradi, except the 14 was the one that was really well liked by the Zentradi, which is why in Macross 7 the VF-14 Vampires show up as modified Valkyries by the Proto-Devlin from the Zentradi who were stolen and brainwashed by the Proto-Devlin from the Macross 5 battle group. And so there is a little bit of a connection, if you want to say that, but the company that developed the YF-21 and also the VF-22 is different than the one that did the VF-XX, I think it's called, in Macross 2. But there is a little bit there, so I wanted to at least point that out. Let's see, the connections to 7 are a little bit deeper. So this is where I want to get into some more deeper stuff with this connection, because the connections to 7 are extremely important to Macross 2, okay? And it's very directly like there's very direct meaning of this. So I want to start with the Jamming Birds. The Jamming Birds song, they sing the song Baruki ni Notte, which is a song that's the first Wendy song you hear in Macross 2 in the episode Moonfesta, which is episode 3. The fact that Jamming Birds sing that song and it has no effect on the Proto-Devlin, and the fact that Barton is so bent on having this this music weapon to use for the military is a direct connection to the propaganda side of what the military does in Macross 2. Because the song is a propaganda song, and it's kind of like Watashi no Kare wa Pairoto is like the Mime song is also similar. It's kind of a military propaganda song. So there is that connection. The reason why, so let's say, also Koi no Banana Moon is the song that they use for the Mime defense in episode 1. It's used in Macross 7. All of the songs from Macross, all the vocal tracks from like the Wendy songs from Macross 2 are used in Macross 7. And this is very, very much on purpose, because what it does is say that Wendy is not that special of an idol, for one. Plus, she's not the main idol of Macross 2, let's be honest, it's Ishtar. And the reason why the song doesn't work on the Marduk is because it's a song that the military's just been kind of, dragging along all these years and not really thinking about, protecting Earth, and they're just kind of like in their own little bubble, right? And this is very much related to the canon of all of Macross, because after 2030, after the second attack on Macross City by a renegade Zentradi group, they banned Zentradi from coming to Earth. Actually full-size Zentradi. If you micronized, you could be there, but if you were full-size Zentradi, you could not be on Earth anymore. They were banned. And this is also another connection to a comment that Mash makes in, was it episode 2? When Ishtar gets her haircut. And they go to the Karuchun Plaza, or whatever it is. Where Ishtar was raised in space, and how Mash is like, well, no one raised on Earth would have hair this nice, or something like that, right? So, this is also showing a direct connection to that part of the Macross canon, where the fact that there's not a lot of people going to Earth from other places. Earth is kind of like locked itself in. And that's directly related to that point. The reason why the songs don't work on the Zentradi, well, they begin to work, but then the Marduk are able to overpower it, is because the military's just kind of like been, dwindling along and twiddling their thumbs, and they haven't really done anything. They've just kind of, whenever some renegade Zentradi group actually appears out of nowhere, they just say, okay, we'll use the Mime defense, and we win, and yay, they had their culture shock, and now they're with us, or some crap like that, right? And this is important because in Macross 7, in the non-broadcast episode that has Chloe's fleet, because without Minmay, the military's had a hard time trying to subdue the Zentradi. Well, they managed to use these songs later to subdue them when they go to Earth, but beyond that, it's really, they don't really do anything. This is why all of the Macross series after Do You Remember Love, well, after Macross 2 is released, take place on places that are quite far away, is because the Earth is kind of like staying in a little shell. This happens in Macross 7 as well. And then I was talking about the songs, how they don't have any effect. It's showing that by using the songs in Macross 7, which takes place 45 years before the events of 2, it's saying that Wendy is just, a propaganda idol piece to, keep the people, interested. She's not that special. Which, if there is anybody who likes Wendy, they might feel a little bit bad about that, but, I don't see an issue with that, really, because it just adds to the fact that, it adds to the deeper lore that this is why the Mimi defense failed in Macross 2. They don't have anybody, like a decent singer, to actually be, powerful enough to, like a Basara or a Mikumo or somebody like that can actually, do something, right? And, this helps make Macross 2 a little more impactful. The songs have more impact when you think of it in this way. Now, there's really not much else besides that really connects to 2 directly, but the fact that the government is trying to test this idea of music weapons with the sound booster on the VF-11s with the jamming birds, says that they're trying to find a way to deal with the possibility of needing something. Well, Basara has a special effect on Chloe's battle group, so they managed to figure it out through that way. But the military just, they don't really give a shit. Now, Frontier, being that it's 14 years after 7, there's not a whole lot there because Frontier is more connected to 0. However, I will say that the option pack in the movie, the Tornado pack that has the 2 cannons on it, is a nod to the rail cannon on the VF2SS. So we have that. Then you have Macross Delta, which actually is a little bit closer, where the Siegfrieds have the 2 little wrist cannons on the arms, which the Metal Siren has 2 gun pods. So there's a connection there. The thing is that the Metal Siren is kind of special. It can actually do a daedalus attack by itself, so it's overpowered. And you see that in episode 5, I believe, of Macross 2, of where they actually where Nyx flies right into a Marduk command ship and does its own daedalus attack thing, and it destroys the entire capital ship by itself. So that. Now, one thing I want to point out about the connections to Delta a little bit more is the Siegfrieds have the single cannon over the shoulder, which is a nod to the VF2SS, but there's a lot more there that Delta actually delves into that that makes it have it has a closer connection to 2 than people might think. And part of that is I just had it in my head. The protoculture stuff. So Belger Stone, I've mentioned this in my Delta TV series review as well. Belger Stone mentions that he believed that his hypothesis was that the protoculture thought that songs could be used as a weapon because you could control people without shedding blood. So it was a very effective weapon, you could say. Now, there's there's a lot of stuff in Delta that delves into that, but and also you think about the Vol syndrome and the way that it is able to control the minds of the people, and it causes, you know, a certain effect within the body of the people. Like, if you watch Delta, you'll see how, like, the veins in their faces all, like, you know, start to pop out of their, like, raise out of their skin, and you can see that when they start going on a crazy attack because of because of Heinz. Now, if you look at Macross 2, when the emulator starts singing the Song of Death, Shinota, the Zentradi have the exact same thing happen to them. This is something you need to pay very close attention to, is that they mention directly that in Macross 2 that the Marduk, and I believe it's Ishtar in episode 3 of Moon Festival, when they go on to the Macross, she specifically explains that the Marduk are a warring race, and they've destroyed various cultures and whatnot. And I can't remember the exact wording she uses, but that specific wording, I believe, was a what is it? A comment related to protoculture, and by saying that they actually destroyed some protoculture ruins or something like that. Like, it's not specifically about the ruins, because ruins stuff doesn't come in until 7, and 7 creates a lot of the most important stuff with the protoculture lore in all of Macross. But if you look at the timeline situation, this is much later. What that would mean is that possibly one of the ruins that that the Marduk may have found when they were still trying to, like, develop their own warring culture or whatever, even though they're basically just, you know, they're basically Zentradi who micronized and then created their own little culture within that, and then they expanded their own little thing, which is specifically stated in the in the Blu-ray limited edition booklet. It's very, very specifically stated there as part of the extra lore to what the Marduk are, which I've done a video on that, which I showed the pictures of the actual pages, and I took pictures of them so I could show people and translate as I go along about the lore of the Marduk. So possibly they came across a ruins or something that was like what they had on Windermere, and how they could use the Kazenuta to kind of control people and stuff like that. So the effect is very similar, what the Song of Death does to what the Wind Song in Macross Delta does. So you could say that partially Belgerstone was right. So is Macross 2 actually supporting his argument that songs are weapons? That's an interesting point to take into consideration with the connections to Delta. The fact that basically the Marduk are Zentradi. They're a splinter Zentradi group that created their own culture, and they also they developed their own songs. So these are Zentradi that actually have songs as part of their culture. So you're taking the warring aspects of the Zentradi and you're giving them songs. And you're giving them songs that help the Marduk, the emulators, control the Zentradi that they use as, like, cannon fodder, basically. But they require them to be mind controlled. Now, this is kind of a relation to Macross Plus, because Sharon Apple used songs to control people in that as well, right? So you could say there's a connection to Macross Plus in that situation. I think that there's a little more connection to 2 through the second Delta movie, but I'm not going to talk about that because that would be spoilers for the second Delta movie, and I haven't done my spoiler review of that yet, so I'm not going to go into that. I'll probably talk about the connections of Macross 2 in that video. But you have all these, connections to the different series, and they all line up, and it culminates in this. And the reason, and one of the big things that is very, very important to the second Delta movie actually helps explain the reason why the Valkyries in Macross 2 are the way they are. Okay? There's important points that I'm not going to go into, but there is some very deep connections from the second Delta movie that actually connect very, very well to Macross 2. Which I'll talk about that in that video. Because I want to make sure that people understand how important Macross 2 is to all of this. Now, the thing is with post Macross 2, so the ASS-1, Alien Starship, which is the original name of the SDF-1 Macross, which is talked about in various different media, why it's called the ASS-1. The throughout the entire series of Macross 2, Ishtar is always talking about how the Macross is Autosnohune, all constantly. Doesn't stop saying it. But in the message from Ishtar, short little minute and a half spoken word thing, that is from the CD single with the Laserdisc set, which I did buy the CD single separately because, Macross 2. And I listened to it, and Ishtar starts to question whether it really was Autosnohune. And was it really the legend that she learned about? And she ends up her conclusion, when she finally comes to the realization, is that that it doesn't matter if it was Autosnohune or not, is that it's given the Marduk a new direction in their culture. So she doesn't really care that it is. And the fact that the Marduk, as I explained in my Marduk lore video, have not had contact with Earth since then, and that's going 10 years after that, which would be the year 2100, which is specifically stated in the booklet for the Blu-ray set. So I have that, and so I want people to know that that lore video specifically talking about that stuff. Within that's also part of the canon of Macross 2, is that the Marduk, after leaving Earth, basically have zero contact with Earth. They don't contact them at all. So we don't know what's going on with the Marduk after the events of Macross 2. Nobody knows. They went back to wherever they're from, and nobody's talked to them, basically. So, but another important thing is that within Macross 2, in various points, like in episode 2 especially, where Hibiki can say a few words in Zentradi, showing that the Zentradi and humanity have really combined together, which is just re-emphasizing what happens, like chronologically anyway, within stuff like 7, where there's 100,000 Zentradi living on City 7 with everybody, with Miria there and stuff. And then you have how there's a whole entire ship for Zentradi, whether they're still big or not, in the Macross Frontier battle group. And then you have You don't see many Zentradi and Macross Delta, to be honest. They're just kind of like here and there in certain episodes, but they're not like really. They're not actively, out there. They're just kind of here and there. So they don't put a lot of emphasis on the Zentradi and Macross Delta, so we can't really say much there. But they're basically living together with people just like everybody else. So the same thing happens in Macross 2, so you can see that they basically completely adapted to living with each other, so everybody's, there. Then you have, the Macross canons themselves. Now, when you think about the events of others, like, what is it? Let's see, what is it? Not, because Macross, the first Macross Delta movie is all chaos, so they have the Mega Shin, Giga Shion, and one other one. And one of them, Elysian, that's right. And one of them is destroyed, so, those are all chaos, so there's no Earth government forces, really, that are involved with that. In Frontier, the Battle Frontier is that, but you can tell once we get to the Delta era, the Earth government is kind of not getting involved with things outside as much. Like, of course, they're very involved with the war with Windermere in 2060, I believe it was. But they aren't, like building giant Macross ships anymore. And Ernest's comments at the end of the first Delta movie, where there's really no, there's the government, the Earth government doesn't really have any energy left to fight over the whole Mikumo's, like, DNA thing being stolen and stuff like that. Which tells you that the Earth government is basically, they don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of... They're not putting a lot of effort into actually protecting the ships anymore. The immigration colonies and stuff. So... they, like, even, Battlefront... The Macross Frontier and Macross Galaxy groups were... They left from Edith, not from Earth. So that's also completely different. So you can tell, like, the Earth government's basically turned into, like, complete corruption. The pilots, because there hasn't been a war in 10 years on Earth, because the last war with any, Splinter's Zentradi group was in 2080, which is 13 years after the events of Macross Delta. They, like, pilots are, like, idols. Like, and this is shown in episode 3, where a girl comes up to ask for the autograph of Nex and Sylvie because she's a fan of theirs. It's all because propaganda. Now, I want to go into... I want to talk about two very important things about Macross 2 that need to be said. One, the nun's name, new UN Spacey name, starts in Macross 2. Without Macross 2, we don't have nuns in any of the future series, like 7 or Frontier or Delta or whatever. Nuns, the logo was all decided in Macross 2. And the idea of Shin Togo Gun was created in Macross 2. And then it's used in all of the future series. So keep that in mind. That's one. Two, Macross 2 is actually quite deep, because if you look at Hibiki's point of view, because he's a reporter, and he's a scandal reporter. He just, like, from the beginning, he just wants to get the scoop and get the ratings and make a lot of money through ratings, and he doesn't care what he does, he just wants high ratings. So that's why he, tries to start stuff with Sylvie and Exogran in the beginning of the first episode. And then he meets Ishtar, and originally he wants to use her as a way to have the biggest scoop you could possibly imagine, but he ends up changing due to like how like spending all that time with her and getting to know her and all this other stuff. He changed his position, and now and another point was after Dennis died, after the government basically censored a lot of the stuff of what they took and made it look like the military was winning the battle when they actually got totally wiped. The floor got wiped with them. Outside of Sylvie and Nyx actually, doing something. But the fact that the government, the Earth government and the military are hiding a lot of stuff and promoting a lot of propaganda, like the Moon Festival is a total propaganda, event to get people interested in the military and shit like that, which helps, like Sylvie and Nyx, be really popular because Sylvie is still young and all this other stuff. So it just keeps with that propaganda thing going. Now, what is that related to in other Macross? Hey, Macross 7, Mean May video. The Mean May story movie that they made, that they used with Mylene is singing, and it was basically, the city office and the military working together to create propaganda to keep the people on City 7 because of the vampires, pro-devil coming in there and like stealing speed each all the time. So this is showing some relation that the government is willing to create a bunch of propaganda and to control the media in order to keep favor with the people, which is a very deep thing. And this can only be done because Hibiki, as a main character, is a reporter. If he was a pilot, they couldn't do this kind of thing. They have to show up from the military perspective. Being that Hibiki he's a normal person, he's just a basic beat reporter, he can actually show the other side of it. Now, what's really interesting is how the news station producer, the top guy, is telling Hibiki to knock off being a stupid scandal reporter, a tabloid reporter, and actually do honest reporting, which is very relevant to what we have today, in real life. Think about that connection too. The Macross 2 has a lot of deep thought in it that makes you think about things that are happening now and stuff like that. In terms of propaganda, use of propaganda and censorship and stuff like that. And who is censoring what. Stuff like that. This is a very deep series in that way. Which can only be done because Hibiki is a reporter. And that has to be said. And you can tell how the military only cares about keeping themselves in power. And this is vitally important. They don't care about the people very much. They just want to keep up the looks that they're actually able to protect the people and all this other stuff. They don't care about whether they're actually going to win the battle or not, because they're very much in the, we've been at peace for 10 years, nobody's going to come and attack us, we're okay, blah, 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 right? So they just collect their paychecks and they don't do anything, and they just, they don't really give a crap about anything. Exagran does, which is why Sylvie tries to talk to him at the hotel, saying, we're not going to be able to use songs to win against the enemy forever. We're going to need to worry about, keeping the military, able to protect the people, or we're going to lose at some point, which was basically a foreshadowing of what happens in all of Macross 2. And the fact that the Hibiki tries to tell the people, he hacks into the TV networks to get people to know what's going on by showing video of him actually going inside the Marduk ship and stuff to tell the people what's going on, which you can see his character development. He goes from just this guy who wants to do nothing but scandals and tabloid crap to someone who actually honestly wants to tell the truth about what's going on because of his experience watching Dennis die, and also the fact that he spends all this time with Ishtar and realizing that he can do something that can actually help people and not just be some, like, loser reporter, right? As for some of the criticism Macross too, which I'll end on the criticisms because I love the series too much and I don't want to bash it too much because a bunch of idiots who don't understand it want to bash it themselves. But I will say, Dennis's death is very kind of meh because it's just an explosion from below. How could that kill him? Well, you could say that maybe like it damaged his air, his oxygen, and so he couldn't breathe anymore and he just died right there. There was no blood, so that's one possibility. Or they just want to use blood in that specific situation. I don't know. But the thing is that scene is kind of meh. It's kind of like used as a plot point so that Ishtar can be taken back to Earth. I think that there needed one thing that I think is a valid criticism of Macross 2 is like Sylvian and Fairy Team and Nyx, they do have their scenes where they're at fighting and stuff and they get to show off how good they are. My complaint is really with Fef. I think if we had one extra episode where maybe Nyx or Sylvie actually fought with Fef, that would have made it so much cooler. I think that Fef was a very good character. That could have been better had they had maybe one or two more episodes to fill his character out. I really think that he could have been a very amazing character. It's just kind of a missed opportunity with him, because we already know he's a good pilot based on how he's fighting at Sylvie in Marduk Disorder. But if Sylvie can't fire back because Ishtar is inside his battle suit, so it's basically Sylvie's just dodging and manages to barely make it out of there. But had it been a more actual one-on-one fight, I thought it would have been cooler, which is a legit criticism of it, which every time I watch it, that's the one thing I always think is, I wish I could have seen Fef in his battle suit fighting more. One other thing I thought that was kind of a little weak was as much as the love triangle is actually kind of it actually becomes a love triangle by the end, I think that it wasn't done. I think they could have done a tiny bit more with it, and made it a little bit better. But I can see why they didn't. But I think they could have made that a little bit better. You don't actually see the love triangle come to its completion until Ishtar sees Hibiki and Sylvie kiss, and then she realizes, oh, well, I guess Hibiki is going to be with Sylvie, which is also, here's another very direct parallel to the love triangle in Do You Remember Love. So you think of Do You Remember Love, Ichijo and Hayase are both military, and Minmei is an idol singer. Well, at the beginning, Ichijo and Minmei are kind of they're with each other, but then after Ichijo and Hayase go to Earth and they're together for a month by themselves, and then their love actually grows from that. So it ends up being that two people from similar backgrounds end up being together, and the singer is and the one who's doesn't have anything in common with those two is basically pushed to the side. So Minmei is a pop singer, so that's why she loses out in the love triangle. However, with the Macross 2 love triangle being, Hibiki, a reporter, Sylvie being a pilot, and Ishtar being a singer but the enemy, it's basically saying that the two humans get together and the Marduk is out. So it's kind of similar that Sylvie and Hibiki are from the same culture or whatever, and Ishtar's the one who's basically left out of it. And so I'm not, there is kind of a parallel there as well, and you could kind of argue that the love triangle wasn't deep enough, if you want to say that. But if you want to say that, you look at Macross Delta, the love triangle on that was just garbage, so it was really forced. So I would say probably the Macross 2 love triangle is better than the Macross Delta love triangle, which thankfully, because the second Delta movie is thrown out the window, which is a very good thing. But I think you could argue that as a legit criticism of Macross 2. I mean, it's limited with being 6 episodes as well, so I mean, there are limitations on how much you can actually do with it. But, that could be one point I can understand where somebody has a criticism of Macross 2. Now, I will say, it kind of has that parallel of, trying to get the alien to learn about Earth culture, and then that alien ends up, that group ends up, ending the war and all blah, 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 right? Kind of like the same way that Do You Remember Love ends, which was by design, which is what people don't understand, is that the guy who wrote Macross 2, Tomita, wrote Do You Remember Love, okay? And he did more than half of Macross 7. So you have to remember that the way that Macross 2 ends and all that stuff was very much by design. So you can't say that's a criticism when that was specifically what they were trying to do. Because they were trying to get the people who remember Do You Remember Love to be interested in Macross 2. And by having a similar kind of scene, and by play on words, because Do You Remember Love was I oboete masu ka, right? And so they're saying, do you remember love from the past? Well, this Moichido Love You, the song title, is kind of a play on words on that, love you one more time. So it's do you remember love? And we'll have love again, which is why the subtitle to Macross 2 is Lovers Again. This is why this was one of the criticisms one of the people had, was the naming of Lovers Again. It was all by design to have a play on words with Do You Remember Love, okay? It was all by design. That is not a valid criticism. If the director and the writer of the show, I don't remember his director, but he was the script writer and everything, and the story writer, Tomita. He did it all by design because he worked on Do You Remember Love, okay? He's one of only 3 original members of the production team that worked on Do You Remember Love. And he was the story writer for Do You Remember Love. He was the story writer for Macross 2. This was all by freaking design, okay? So when people criticize the name Lovers Again, or they think oh, Ishtar singing at that particular point, the song title is very much the same. And even Tomita, in his interview, I can't remember which one it was. I can't remember if it was This Is Animation or it was the Blu-ray book, specifically stated that he wanted Moichido Love You to be the I Oboete Masu ka of Macross 2, and he wanted the song Yakusoku, which is the ending song for the final episode of Macross 2, with Ishtar singing, to be the Tenji no E no Gu of Macross 2. He specifically stated that. So you have to understand, he did all these things by design. I will not consider those valid criticisms if that was the set goal, okay? So, and this is something that people in the English-speaking Macross community don't understand, is they don't read any of the interviews. They think that Kawamori hates Macross 2. No, he doesn't. That was Itano that hates Macross 2. But who's in charge of Macross 2? Kawamori. So what Itano says doesn't matter, okay? 1. 2. If the story writer for Do You Remember Love was the main story writer for Macross 2, he understands Macross. Also the fact that he wrote more than half of the episodes for Macross 7, and he wrote all of Dynamite 7, by the way. The fact that he is that involved with Macross up until that point, I forgot. I think he was in Zero as well. I don't believe he was in Frontier Delta. I think that was mostly Kawamori. But the fact that he was so involved, he knew what people would like. Macross 2 was a hit in Japan at the time. Okay, I stated this in my Macross 2 is Canon long 1-hour video. So you can go watch that if you want to see the interview that I pull up. He specifically says that. So I want people to realize all of the things that were throwbacks to the original Macross, to Do You Remember Love, were all by design because the story writer was the same dude. And the fact that this is the final time Mikimoto's animation is actually used for a Macross series in its entirety. It isn't completely Mikimoto's designs that are moving, okay? His designs were in Do You Remember Love, specifically. He did all the character designs for, of course, the original Macross TV series, because he's very good friends with Kawamori, and they went to the same university and stuff like that. But Macross 7, well, let's first say Macross Plus. It's completely different character designer. Completely different. Macross 7. Mikimoto did the base designs, but the animation was done by somebody completely different, and he just adapted Mikimoto's designs in his own way into the TV series, so it doesn't look exactly like Mikimoto's work, okay? Always remember that, okay? It is not Mikimoto directly. And then the final thing that Mikimoto did animation-wise was the base character design for Roy Falker in Macross 0. He has not touched animated Macross since then, okay? And he wasn't even the lead designer. He just gave the base design, and then they adapted it to the series with the actual character design for all the other characters, okay? So, we have the final series with Mikimoto. We have the original story writer for Macross, Do You Remember Love, being, and also I believe he did the TV series as well, being the main guy for Macross 2, and he did a lot of Macross 7. You have to understand that all of this is very important to understanding Macross 2. If you understand this, Macross 2 is more interesting, okay? And you will understand it better by knowing these little facts. But because none of the people who've done reviews of Macross 2 have actually spent the time, or because they don't know Japanese, they can't actually read it, or they can't read any of the interviews or anything like that, they don't understand this, which is why they bash it so easily, because they don't understand it. And one final thing on the positive side, before I end this video, because this is a pretty long video that I wanted to get everything out as much as I could, because I wanted to explain everything very specifically, because this is the official review I'm putting up, that I'm doing differently than everybody else's, because everybody just explains the story and that's it. Ishtar is the only actual innocent idol character, like singer. When you look at all of the main protagonist singers in Macross, so I'll do Basara first, Basara and Mylene we'll do first, just to get them out of the way first, because they're the easiest. They're very, very, Basara is just music. Mylene is just complain, and acts like her mother all the time. But they're not innocent, you could say. I mean, Mylene in certain situations, yeah, I could say she is. I mean, especially Dynamite 7, there's something there. But that's just because she's so young, right? She's only, 14 through most of the TV series, up until Operation Stargaze, and then she turns 15, and then she's 16 in Macross Dynamite 7. But she's not, like, innocent, right? Then, yeah, Saranome from Zero. She's not innocent, you could say, because she's been through a lot and that kind of stuff. It's just the attitude of the character. Sara is a very strong character. Basara is a very strong character. Mylene's a very strong character. Minmay is like the, kind of veteran feeling idol star, like pop idol star, and she's not that innocent, right? You don't have anybody really innocent in Macross Delta. In Macross Frontier, Danka's kind of like a Minmay-ish kind of character, with Cheryl being a Basara-like character, but not to that level, not to that degree. Cheryl's kind of a strong character, or Danka's kind of a more, typical teenage girl character. Ishtar is a completely different kind of character out of all of the singers in Macross. She's very innocent. She's she hasn't had the, how do I want to explain it in innocent? Like pure? Like the Japanese word is junsui, which is pure, but she's very unique out of all the female singers in Macross, and as a character as well, she's very, very unique. So people need to remember that Macross 2 has a lot to it that's very unique. It's the only Macross series that Kawamori did not do the mecha designs for it. So it's very different as well. But it's unique because it's somebody different doing it, even though it sticks within the idea of the VF1 in a lot of ways. It also is very different, and there's some Zentradi influence in it. It's different. It's very unique. And I think that, people need to kind of give Macross 2 more of a chance. To me, it is probably the best thing in Macross. Period. Outside of maybe Do You Remember Love, but I always, I watched Do You Remember Love. Oh, Do You Remember Love is greater. And then I watch Macross. Oh, Macross 2 is better. And I always flip flop between the two. But they are the top two to me in Macross. Everybody should be watching Macross 2. Everybody should be enjoying Macross 2. It's a very good series. Yes, there's some limitations with it due to it only being 6 episodes, whereas some other series are a little bit better because they have more episodes, or they had things a little bit better planned out maybe. But Macross 2 is an amazing series. Everybody should watch it. It is canon. Oh, never forget, it is all Macross 2 will always be canon. And anybody says otherwise can take a... They can piss off. I'll be nice about it this time. My previous video that was only like 10 minutes or something about Macross 2 to the haters. I went all out on that. So if people want to hear my opinion about the haters, watch that video. If you want to understand the lore of the Marduk a little bit better, watch my Macross lore of the Marduk video. If you want to know why Macross 2 is canon, watch my Macross 2's canon video. But I highly recommend Macross 2. Everybody should watch it. It is the closest thing to Macross. Yes, and Frontier is just a copy-paste in a lot of ways of the original series, so ignore it. That is not the closest thing to Macross since Do You Remember Love? No, Macross 2 is. Macross 2 has everything about the atmosphere, and everything is exactly, Do You Remember Love-ish. So, if you want the closest thing to a Do You Remember Love experience, it's Macross 2, not Frontier. Anybody who says that does not understand Macross 2. Or Macross, period. So we'll put that there. This is, I think, this is the one series that keeps getting forgotten. But, thankfully, due to new merchandise coming out, and thankfully for the Macross channel having Suzuki Minori and the producer or something from Big West for Macross Delta going to the Tezuka Osamu Museum in Takarazuka City, and what is it? Going there and showing off Macross 2, and there being more discussion of Macross 2 this year. I'm hoping more people go and watch it. Suzuki Minori has been pushing it very hard. She likes Macross 2, which is very important because as Freya is a very popular character from Delta, having the voice actress from one of the more popular characters in Delta telling people you should watch Macross 2 is very, very important to continuing the fact that Macross 2 is one of the greatest Macross there is, and people should never forget that, okay? And so I'm going to end the video here. Everybody, watch Macross 2. It is great. Don't listen to the haters. They aren't telling you the truth of Macross 2. Yes, I'm biased because I was watching Macross 2 when it came out. So, you know, I have lots of fond memories of Macross 2. So I have my own biases as well. But the haters' criticisms are completely wrong. And watch it for yourself. Enjoy it. It is a great series. And then when you have a chance to watch the second Delta movie and you can kind of combine all the protoculture lore and all that together, Macross 2 is infinitely more interesting because then it makes you think about the lore. So do that. Watch Macross 2. Enjoy it. Everybody should enjoy it. I hope everyone enjoys it. And I will see you in my Macross 2 Zettai Live stream or my review of the movie that will be done next week. So, see you next time.